Hello, everybody. I just wanted to go live here and talk about um, a huge mentor for me and probably a lot of other drummers, Charlie Watts, who passed away. And I'm just on here because I know there are a lot of funny stories that Charlie was part of because he was such a unique drummer and character. He really never considered himself famous for a long time because I don't think he really liked the celebrity side of things. So I'm just going to hang out here and see what kind of stories people are interested in sharing, and I'll talk about them as they come up. Um, I probably could comment on quite a few of them because I've been a Stones fan ever since I can remember, and also a musician. So there's a lot of things that the Rolling Stones did throughout their career that me and my buddies kind of mimicked, I guess, in a way, through our musical career, and especially in the blues. It's very unique how the Rolling Stones decided to do what they were doing at such a young age in 1962 and putting together a blues band, basically a Chicago style of blues band. So, um, and Charlie was a huge part of that band. Of course, he was there from, I would like to say from the beginning, but there were other musicians that were kind of temporary that played with the Rolling Stones. And then Charlie was sought after by Keith, Mick, and Brian quite a bit as they were forming the band. The band was actually started, I guess, in a way, or inception of was by Ian Stewart, the piano player, and Ian basically met with Keith Richards in the first meetings of the Rolling Stones, and that's a lot of that is available to the public to find online and read about the beginnings of the Stones. So I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen with the Rolling Stones now that Charlie's passed away. Um, it's funny because of the pandemic. It was every day. It seemed to be a shock for me to wake up and read about one of my friends and a musician that was gone, or just family for that matter, because of this horrible pandemic or whatever it is. There's a lot of different opinions as to what the pandemic's really all about. So, anyways, um, I always thought one of the funny things that Charlie Watts was quoted as saying, there was a questionnaire that the Rolling Stones took part of. I can't remember the name of the writer, but I read this story a long time ago, probably 40, at least 30 or 40 years ago. It was in some book I had on the Rolling Stones. And there was a questionnaire that they had in the book, and each musician in the band was asked a question: what is the height of misery for you in life? Like, what is your most miserable situation to be in life, in any situation possible? And I remember reading Charlie's, and I just laughed when I read that his answer was no no paper in the lavatory, being the bathroom, as the height of misery. And I really stopped to think about that. And yeah, that is not that's a very unpleasant situation to be in for anyone. So he didn't say a lot about in interviews. In fact, he said that he didn't like doing interviews. So until later, and um, yeah, I'm just wondering what everyone else has got to share for stories. So I'm not sure exactly how this works as far as commenting. I believe it just comes up here. Let me do a test. See what happens. This should work. So actually, I started off my musical career as a drummer, and can't remember exactly when I discovered the Stones. I remember I was pretty young. I think the first song I heard might have been Brown Sugar, which I've learned over years that although the songs were written by Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, or the publishing rights went to them, the songs themselves were either written by one or the other. And believe it or not, Brown Sugar, a real rockin' tune featuring a lot of open 5-string guitar tunings, is actually was Mick Jagger came up with the riff and pretty much the whole song. So I found that quite unique. I'm just trying to think of some other funny stories about Charlie Watts that I remember reading about through the years. A lot of the stuff that I found really humorous was what he did say when he was actually in an interview talking to people, was sometimes just hilarious. And because it was so, he, he was, I don't think he ever thought about the big being diplomatic sort of um, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Being a diplomatic individual when talking about music and the music business didn't seem to be a really high priority for him, which is, I think, quite commendable that he just told it like it is. He would say what he was feeling, and maybe that's why he didn't really like doing uh, interviews, because I'm kind of familiar with that from my history as a musician. When it's what comes out of your mouth when you're being interviewed by a writer is sometimes very unexpected, because I guess most people like me don't always think about what they're saying. So, and I think with Charlie Watts, though, it was the other way around. Is he would actually really think about what was being asked of him, and he was very witty when answering questions. So far, nobody's sharing any stories yet. I'm not sure if this is even going to work, but I'm going to hang out here. There's a lot of Rolling Stone stories that I've gathered just through reading articles and stuff and listening to interviews. I like to, when it comes to stories and stuff, especially musician orientated stories, I really like to listen to the musicians themselves talk about what they're um, talk about their lives. So when Keith Richards does interviews, there's a lot of stuff he says. He's written books. He has one book, I believe it's called Life, and that was the most recent book. But there was other books that came out through the 80s and the 70s, I believe, where there's direct quotes and things from Keith Richards about stuff. One thing I do know for sure is that the Rolling Stones, without Charlie Watts, I don't think it would. If I was to put myself in someone's shoes like that, where you played with a guy for that many years, I don't think he's replaceable. You can put somebody on drums, but it's definitely not going to be the same. So it would be great if that was possible, but that's a little bit different. There's Charlie Watts drumming is just amazingly bang on. So as a musician and a fellow drummer, I also learned to play a lot of drum beats from my friends that I've got in Chicago, blues players that I've met over the years, um, touring bands basically that would be coming through town, and I would always hang out with whoever I could hang out with and talk to them about music. Um, so with Charlie Watts, when it came to playing blues, a unique thing about his meter or his timing when he played a blues, I would play along with it when I was learning, and I noticed that the timing of it was very precision. And according to other information I've read from other members in the band, that Keith Richards would actually Charlie Watts would actually work with Keith Richards to establish the timing of the songs. So a lot of situations can be like that in a band, where for example, if I'm playing a blues song, I will start it off on the instrument or on the guitar, and then expect the drummer to fall in or start playing with the same type of groove. That doesn't always work, because sometimes drummers will play faster or they'll play slower than the actual meter of the song or the beat of the song. And it's a difficult thing to explain. But there are drummers that actually play a little bit behind the beat of the song. And Charlie Watts was not one of these types of drummers. He played it, he made it sound like he was playing that way, but when you listen to his blues, when they played the blues, the timing's very, very precise, almost like a metronome, which is kind of commendable because, like me, I like to play deeper into the pocket. So it's or pocket meaning the groove of the song. A little, I like to hold it back a little bit. Maybe it's just because I'm lazy. I'm not sure. It's something that I really like, and I guess I also learned that a lot from the musicians I know from Chicago and Texas and a lot of different areas in the states. So luckily, where I live, there's always a steady stream. Or before the pandemic, there was quite a steady stream of blues players that came through the region here every week, and so I got to sit down with them because I'm a musician. Sometimes I'd actually jam with them, depending if there was a jam at the venue that they were playing, and I'd learn all this stuff. So the with Charlie Watts, when he played um, the beat being bang on, that meant the bass player would probably have to. Well, bass players always work with the drummers. However, from my experience, if you're playing with a drummer like Charlie Watts who likes to push forward, the bass player, to match up with a drummer like that, should be back a little bit when playing the blues, which would work a lot of the times, and you would get this really nice groove going for the blues song. So with a drummer like Willie Big Eye Smith for Muddy Waters, he played so far behind the band that it would actually slow the entire band down, but the music wouldn't slow down. So um, with Charlie Watts being on there all the time, it was very, I guess it would be more practical to always have Charlie Watts playing with a bass player that would actually um, play on the beat with Charlie. Kind of makes sense. It's almost like a drum machine. In fact, Charlie's beat was sometimes duplicated in the recording studio, where they would loop his drums. So he'd play a few meters or a few bars of a song, drum beat, and then the record engineers, the recording engineers, could take that and duplicate it over and over and over and put it on the recording. Rolling Stones really didn't, the rest of the band really didn't like that idea because it's kind of demeaning to a human being in any situation to be replaced by a computer. And that's essentially what those machines that are able to do that are. They're basically computers. And like I said, Charlie Watts's drum style, I don't remember any song that I can think of where it was um, unintentional for him to speed up a beat or slow a beat down. The only song that I can think of off the top of my head that they recorded was the Midnight Rambler. And the drumming on that song is incredible because it has different tempos throughout the entire song. So it starts off at one tempo. There's a middle part that's really uh, um, slow, and then as the song progresses, his drumming speeds up. And at the end of the song, I think the tempo is pretty much to the same as the beginning of the song. So that in itself, I think, is a really incredible talent to be able to do that and be able to bring the entire band back to that original beat without, you know, without missing a beat, as they say. So Charlie Watts had that talent. It's hard to find in any drummer with that kind of skill level. And a lot of that, I think, people kind of took for granted with all the hit songs. It's different intros that he'd play, like the intro for "Start Me Up." As a drummer, I I couldn't learn to play it. It was when a spontaneous thing that happened, and it would take a really long time to learn to play a drum intro like that. So, still waiting for some other funny stories about Charlie or any. I'm just talking about the man's talent pretty much as a drummer from a drummer's and musicians experience. So I learned to play the drums a lot by Charlie Watts, just studying the way he played things. And something very, very unique that I really couldn't understand when I watched him play, because as YouTube came along, uh, it made it possible for people to actually watch the videos. And if you had never seen a drummer live, it was sometimes a surprise to see what the drummer was actually doing on the drums as I was learning to play those beats. I would see him doing things like playing a drum beat with the snare drum and the hi hat, but stopping his hi hat hand with the stick. He would stop it and hit his snare drum, and then start it again, stop it and hit the snare drum. But he'd only be missing 1/8 beat on playing that. And I thought, why is he doing that? And then I found out later that was because uh, in his style of drumming, and something that is probably really important, is that the Charlie Watts beat, that has a lot to do with why it was so precise, is the bass drum and the snare drum are really the two. Those are two of the main factors of rock and roll, and the Rolling Stones being a rock and roll and blues band. That's a real strong point. So as he would play any beat, and you could see these in any kind of live footage, he would play. He would stop playing the hi hat, so I'd be going like this, and it's like, wow, why is he doing that? Because I just played nonstop on the hi hat. And then as you listen to it more, you can see the snare drum sound is actually standing out a lot more because of that style. And I never seen another drummer play with that style. So when it comes to musicianship, Charlie Watts is actually an innovator because unless somebody out there can tell me what drummer also played that style, and I've never seen it. I've seen a lot of drummers being a a big blues fan, and that's the my basis for the way I play today. I never seen anybody play that way. I've seen Clifton James play live. Clifton James played with Bo Diddley, and he played with oh Willie Dixon, a lot of Chicago acts throughout his whole career. I saw him in the early '80s, I believe, playing with Willie Dixon, and his sons, Butch, Freddie, were both in that band. And yeah, Clifton James also had unique features about the way he played. Um, but like I said, I've never seen anybody play that straight ahead beat like Charlie Watts, where he's leaving the gap for the snare drum, and it just cracks on right on through. Could be a major reason why. Could be the main reason why the Rolling Stones became as well known as they are, and it's it come a lot of times it'll come down to the drum beat. Throughout the rock and roll era of the 50s, 60s, 70s, they always talked about the beat. It's all in the beat as rock and roll was growing. And that's true. So if your drummer's doing something unique that no one else has ever done, like Charlie Watts did, yeah, you become, it puts you up above the crowd in a way, because you're an innovator. It's very hard to find innovators today. People that are innovating on the instrument. There are a few there. I'm not going to mention any, but there's a lot of stuff that keeps getting repeated over and over and over and over through history, and basically based on the blues. So here you have Charlie Watts playing drum beats that are pretty much all his own design. And the one thing that always amazed me is when I learned to play drums. I had this cheap, like really cheap little drum set that I got. In fact, before that, I built my own drum set out of sheet metal and oil drums in our barn. Anyways, that's what I used to learn to play drums on, with a little tape recorder just turned up to full blast so I could hear what I was playing along with. But yeah, I'd be banging away on oil drums. And then my mother thought, well, he thought I must really be serious about playing drums. So she went off and bought me a little drum set. I did pay for part of the drum set with my allowance that I was getting back then. And I got this little drum set. And what was really cool is when I first saw the drum set, I said, hey, that's like that Rolling Stones drummer's drum set. It's really cool. It wasn't nearly the same quality, but it looked the same. And that, for me, was really important. So I guess that could be why I'm also another musician who's a big fan of Charlie Watts. Charlie's was criticized throughout his whole life for not being a flashy drummer, and not. I don't think he ever played a drum solo. And there are other drummers that are spectacular, like Charlie Watts, that have that incredible beat, and they've never played drum solos. They probably know how to play a drum solo, but they don't need to show off and play a drum solo. Which, in my opinion, the drums, as a drummer, you play a drum solo to meet more girls, to to show off. That's why drummers take drum solos. It's not a matter of skill, I don't think, because I think every drum solo I've heard is pretty much a copy of someone else's drum solo, bits and pieces combined to create a drum solo. There are some drummers that are quite unique, but I think with a person like Charlie Watts, the drums were always quite straight ahead and well constructed beats. So he didn't need a crazy amount of drums either. He basically has the snare drum, a bass drum, a tom tom, and then a floor drum. That's it. And then he has his cymbals. So what they when I was learning to play drums out of books, I didn't go very far with learning the how to read the notes of drums, but I can read that. But the thing about um, the drums themselves is that I totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, there's they're basic. Those that's a basic set they called a trap kit. If you take anything away, it's no longer really considered a drum set. So what Charlie Watts would play was the basic drum set. And guess what? That's all he needed throughout his entire musical career. He never took anything away. He never really added. He added a little bit to it, but not a heck of a lot. So, yeah, I can't believe nobody's got stories to share about Charlie. And it's amazing drummer, amazing musician, and amazing career. I'm sure the stories of um, the Rolling Stones involve a lot of Charlie Watts. In fact, it's funny. I've also read over the years that they considered there was musicians in the band that said it was Charlie Watts's band. And I'm not sure exactly who was quoted as saying that, but I could see why that um, someone in the band would say that because Charlie was he's a leader of drummers. So it's not like he just played the drums. He played the drums and he knew how to play a lot of different styles, a lot more styles than the Rolling Stones were actually known for. He could play jazz, and I don't think the Rolling Stones covered a lot of jazz or improvisational jazz. And the stuff he did in jazz was also very unique because of the skills that he developed through rock and roll. He could also bring into the jazz world as a drummer. So it was really quite uh, interesting to see his career progress into other areas outside the Rolling Stones. So, um, boy, I'm talking myself hoarse on this. I thought I'd be getting other stories that I could share with people, but it's I am very sad as well. But to get through times like this, you got to think about how great the man was, and that's keeps me from getting too sad. Is celebrating the very positive points of Charlie and how how great a drummer he was, and not a lot of drummers really respect that, and I think it's because he didn't play the drums with a lot of flash. Um, he would play the drums with flash, but it was his own type of flash. And I guess what I'm saying is that it was more, not trying to do things fast, which a lot of drummers do, especially in drum solos. And today there's some drummers that are just using all these effects and tricks to make them sound like they're faster than they actually are. I've heard some crazy stuff by some drummers, not saying taking anything away from their talent, like they're all very talented, but when you start getting into tricks, you can fool a lot of people, and I guess maybe that's part of the game, right? So with Charlie, I don't think there was really any tricks other than skill. Also, something that I was really surprised since the advent of this internet. Um, with the internet, it made it possible to see, especially during the pandemic, all this stuff that started getting uploaded to YouTube. I started seeing footage that I've never seen in my whole life from the early 60s, middle of the 60s. And I had never seen the Rolling Stones live because I'm not a real big fan of going to arenas or giant places to go see bands. I always go to blues clubs and they're very sparsely populated for any show at a blues club. That's because that's just the music I'm into. So but watching this footage that has come out through the years on the Rolling Stones, I was really blown away to see a concert that the Stones did. I think it was in 1964, and Charlie Watts was really well known for playing his drums a certain way. I should have grabbed some drumsticks before I started this, but basically, the drummer holds the stick like this in his left hand, and then the drummer holds the stick like this in his right hand. And that's a classic way of, there's a couple of pens, a classic way of holding sticks. So the left hand is doing a lot of work on the snare drum like this. I think they call that the classic hold or something. And then there's the matched grip, which a lot of drummers play like this. Boom, 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 boom. You've probably seen a lot of that on videos of rock bands, heavy metal bands, hard rocking bands. That's called a match grip. Until I saw this video, I thought Charlie Watts always played like this with the classic or standard grips. And then I saw him playing loud because in 1964, the audience would get so crazy, the girls would be screaming, and the only way for the drummer to be heard was to be belting the snare drum almost like a whip using the left hand. So if you try to do that like this, you don't get a lot of power because you don't have a lot of muscle here to support just the turning of your wrist to make a loud sound. Some drummers do. They don't have to play a matched grip. But from my own personal experience drumming, you get a lot more precision and for rim shots and things like that. Rim shots are a loud sound that the snare drum makes when you play like this. You can also make rim shots with a drumstick like this. Charlie Watts, 1964, playing for a screaming crowd of people, is playing his left hand like this and just pounding on a drum. I don't even think the drums were mic'd back in 1964. They just had like a microphone in front of the drummer, and good luck, picking up the bass drum and the snare drum with one microphone like that. So in order for him to be heard, Charlie would have to play with a lot of force when all these people were screaming. Oh, I got to stop this for a minute. I don't even know again. Hang on. Hello. Hi. Yeah, sure. No. Yeah. Well, he's credited on Problems, I think. I can. Well, not at SoCan. We didn't do a song called Trouble. I can't think of anything. We played the cover Trouble No More, but I don't think we. Sure. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Oh, I don't know. If he, yeah. Well, if, it doesn't sound like he knows what he's talking about, so he's got to figure out what he's talking about first before he can even say anything. Oh, sure. Okay. Cool. Um, okay. Yeah, you too. Thanks. Bye bye. That is really strange. Um, that was a call from an old partner, a partner and collaborator on songwriting. Um, Apparently, the drummer. How ironic! We're talking about drummers. The drummer that we work with wants songwriting credit for a song that we didn't even write or know about. But yeah, people are getting older, and pandemic stuff is still having a big effect on people. I've noticed. So, getting back to what we were talking about, we're talking. Oh, looks like somebody's got a story maybe to share with us here. I hope so. I'm not sure who it is, but um, the funny stories about Charlie Watts, the drummer for the Rolling Stones, who passed away. Um, Most of the stories I've been telling are mostly technical stuff from a drummer standpoint because I really think that if there was a blues drummers Hall of Fame or a drummers Hall of Fame, Charlie Watts should definitely have been in it. Um, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is pretty good, though. I don't think a lot of people are eligible for that. So um, definitely. Oh yeah, but what I was talking about with Charlie Watts was his matched grip way of playing the drums. He was the kind of drummer that knew when he had to play that way. If I'm not getting loud enough sounds out of this, I'm going to have to play matched grips to get my volume at enough um, volume, get his drums at enough volume so Keith Richards at least can hear what he's doing. Because that's something that a lot of people don't know is when you're a performing musician, especially as a drummer, I can remember having to play the drums so hard when I played this band a long time ago. We were called the Dirty Rats out of high school, and the name basically says it all. We played a lot of rock and roll stuff from from the 50s, 60s, 70s. Lots of Rolling Stone stuff we played, but it was mainly rock and roll band. I remember having to play that drum set so loud because the guitar players were loud, and if I didn't play loud, they weren't able to hear and keep the beat. So when Charlie Watts was playing these songs in 1964, like we played to crowds, but they were just drinking crowds of people, drinking and cheering and stuff, and not screaming girls. And the sound of screaming girls, you look at these videos from the 60s and these rock concerts. Um, um, they had to play loud, so that's kind of my point. And when you're playing loud as a drummer, the drums to begin with are loud. That's the loudest instrument on stage until you start putting guitars through amplifiers, and that's when things kind of get crazy in volume for the drummer and for the singer and everybody else. Because today I work more of as a singer, or I play as a singer and guitar player more than drums, but I still do some drum work. Um, so to be playing at loud volumes, that would have been kind of hard on the guys' ears as well. Although the kits weren't nearly as well designed as they are today, the drum kits, they were still, you can still get a pretty good bang out of an old snare drum. In fact, I think the snare drum I've got is from the 60s right now, and it's still pretty loud. So, that being said, yeah, and I think today the Rolling Stones probably were playing a lot quieter than they did in the 70s and probably the 80s, simply because all the guys that I know that get up in age, I'm starting to get up in age now, and as I get some gray hair, I don't like it super loud like I used to in my 20s, because it's just like it's hard on your hearing. So, the guys that can continue with that and not go deaf and lose their hearing, that's kind of amazing. Because, anyways, getting back to Charlie Watts, they later on in their careers, they probably played at a lot quieter volume, because you never saw Charlie Watts again use that match grip for playing drums. That was something that he had to do in the 60s, which is really it's kind of cool in a way, because the jazz drummers also, very few of the jazz drummers will play with this match grip for drumsticks. A lot of them are playing with that classic grip. So that stick would be hitting your cymbals and your tom-toms, and this stick was mainly meant for the snare drum. So, okay, somebody's got a story for us here. I'll just repeat what's being said, because it apparently was in the news, but most of the stuff that I'm talking about, I've read through the media and through autobiographies and people that I know. I knew some musicians that had played with the Rolling Stones on tour, and can't remember who it was, but they were blues guys. Might have been George Thorogood. I've met George once briefly, but we didn't talk in depth for long. So I've got a story here. The guy says they were in a hotel room in Amsterdam, and Mick called Charlie in the middle of the night asking, "Where's my drummer?" I know that story. It's a funny story. I'll let this our guest here tell the rest of the story, and I'll relay it to you. Go ahead. So Charlie Watts responded by going over to Mick's room, punching him in the face, and said, "Yep." So Charlie Watts went over to Mick's room and punched him in the face. And I believe part of that story is it was like at 4 or 5 in the morning that Mick called him. And when he got to the room about half an hour later from the call, he showed up at the room, shaved, nice suit on. I think this is the same story. And he said, I think I know the next slide. I think the next line was, "Don't ever call me your drummer." I think that was what Charlie said to him after he punched him. That is a good story. I was going to tell that one too. So exactly, and I can see why Charlie would do that, because I myself, as a drummer, if I was ever in a situation Oh, this guy's in Holland, so he's translating from. Okay, I think I got the rest of the story for him. Um, so oh, this he was in. So were you in Holland? And you saw the Stones only one time in 2017. That's cool. And he lives there. So yeah, you're a very lucky guy. Because I'm pretty sure that story. Yep, I'm pretty sure that story occurred in Amsterdam, right? Yeah, that story did occur in Amsterdam. I'm quite certain. I read that. I think, in the book Life by Keith Richards. And Keith Richards' book Life has probably been the most eye-opening or fact-revealing um, piece of literature about the band and the history of the band and the success of the band that has ever come out. There was some things in that book, getting aside from Charlie Watts, but this also involves Charlie, because he's a Rolling Stone, and his partner, of course, is Keith Richards. Some of the things that happened between Mick and Keith, um, if you read some of the stories, yeah, it was 1984 that Mick Jagger got punched by Charlie Watts, and it took place in 1984. That was some time ago, and I think, yeah, it was. There was a lot of turmoil, I guess, in the Stones about that time between 84 and 89. It was like, oh, what are we doing? Kind of thing. Um, and everybody was having issues, like personal issues, more than in the past, more issues than in the past. So, um, Charlie, yeah, lead vocalist syndrome, exactly. Mick Jagger. Um, yeah, he was. The reason why I should explain that a little further from what I read in the book was like when Mick Jagger was punched by Charlie Watts was because of the phone call. Mick Jagger was a little drunk, a little tipsy, and I don't know why he would call his friend and call him his drummer, because that's kind of weird, because it's like a possessive thing. You're the drummer for the Rolling Stones, but somebody in the band thinks that you belong to that person, and nobody really likes. I don't think anybody really likes to have that feeling. It's almost like being uh, what's the word? A spouse? No, or a slave. Yeah, yeah. Mick was drunk that night for sure. Um, so it's getting back to just to add a little to this story coming out of Holland, is that after he said that to Charlie, when he came down, he didn't want to come down. It was like he was officially coming down to sock his friend in the face. Or who knows? At 5 in the morning, it's hard to say what Charlie would have been up to at that hour, but more than likely sleeping. Um, so very good story. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that story. That's a good one. Um, so and then the Rolling Stones. Yeah, yeah. But when Mick Jagger, after he was punched, when he fell down, he actually fell onto a silver platter of smoked salmon that was sitting on the table. And I think in the book, yeah, that is funny. Um, landed in the smoked salmon, and I think he was also wearing the jacket that Keith wore at his wedding, at Keith's wedding, to Patty Hansen. Anyways, yeah, that's a very good story. The more like that, the merrier. If anyone listening in has got stories that they have from being on tour working with the band, those are always awesome. The crew for the Rolling Stones is quite large, and they have a lot of stories there. Um, and I expect the press will probably come out with more funny stories from Charlie Watts' career as the drummer for the Rolling Stones over the years. They're hard to find, but they are tasty nuggets. Just because there's not a lot of press on Charlie, so it's the interviews that Charlie does, or if you're lucky enough to sit down with Charlie Watts and just rap with him, he I would have I would really have liked to done that because in a way Charlie's one of what we call a musicians is that you could probably sit down easy with Charlie Watts and just rap with them because that was more of the type of life he lived. He didn't live like a rock star. That wasn't really his thing. He dressed pretty cool and Um, I don't think it was extravagant or anything. It was all very conservative looking. Um, However, there's not a lot of information about that other than what we know about him as being a drummer. And there are drummers that have done interviews with Charlie Watts that probably could also tell some pretty good stories. So hopefully we get some more of those. Oh yeah, that's the person from Holland has got shared with us the fact that Charlie Watts didn't have a driver's license, but he had a lot of cars, and I saw that too. In fact, you can probably Google Charlie's cars or Charlie Watts cars, and you'll see what he collected. He collected some really nice cars, but he wasn't able to drive any of them unless he probably drove them on private property. That is unique. That's funny. So, yeah, he owned a lot of cars. We know that. And what else did he do in his private life? That's is quite private. I know he was married to the same woman for a very long time, and that is super commendable, especially in anyone in show business that can keep a marriage together over the years. That's tough. That's just a really tough thing. Uh, as a musician as well, it's hard on my relationship. Tours, playing places, um, and you know the girl's paying a lot of attention to you. It's I don't know why why that happens. It's just it all depends on the musician, I suppose. And um, well, that's something else I was going to say about Charlie. Or from what I understand, when he did get into the Rolling Stones, I mentioned that other musicians were filling in on bass and drums. So Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman apparently were the last two to join the Rolling Stones. So um, when I was playing in Three Times the Blues, this goes back to the late '80s, early '90s. Me and my partner, we hired drums and bass. Well, not so much a bass player, but we had to hire a lot of drummers because they were at the time in short supply. So we had to with the Rolling Stones. I think Charlie Watts was pretty well known. I think he was a bit of a celebrity in more of the jazz community because he was playing a lot of the jazz gigs. And I don't think a lot of drummers out there really, in 1962, really wanted to play blues. So um, when Mick and Keith and Brian got together in their little pad there, all they did was study blues. They weren't studying jazz. Keith Richards said in his book that they just focused on studying blues, Chicago blues, same stuff that I kind of uh, focused on when I was learning to play as well. So to find a drummer like Charlie Watts, oh, that would be hard. So what I really respect about that band, especially the leadership of the band at the time, was that they were willing to wait until um, Charlie Watts committed to playing with them on a full time basis. I don't know. The drummers I've worked with professionally, um, we had our bass player committed, just like Bill Wyman was kind of committed to the Stones. We had a bass player committed to our band, but the drummer was kind of didn't know who he wanted to play with exactly. But we wanted this drummer because similar situation. Nobody really was interested in playing Chicago blues where I'm from. A lot of people and a lot of people were saying they were blues and we're a blues band and basically lying. I wouldn't say lying, but misinformed about the type of music they're playing. Um, a lot of people say they play blues, but they're not really blues players. And so with Charlie Watts, I think he knew he was perfect for that role with the Rolling Stones because of his jazz background. I think he kind of I think he could probably see where it was going to go. Although they all admit they didn't think it was going to even last 6 months at the time. And nobody thinks when you're young things are going to last for a long time. I didn't know I'd still be playing music at my age. So and and the thing is, it's not about money either. It's about like they all say, well, we're not in it for the money. It's there and it's great, but they're doing it for the love of the music. And I think that's what kind of drew Charlie Watts to the Rolling Stones because the music they were playing, the Chicago blues. I could go into a long history on Chicago blues, but the information is already out there for you. You can look up people like Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf, Albert King, Freddie King, Jimmy Reed, and you'll get a really good sense of the music that all those guys were studying in 1962 to play blues in England. It's really kind of uh, for someone who wasn't alive then uh, to see what kind of motivation that those five guys had to do what they did for their whole lives. They made a career out of playing Chicago blues for everybody. So it was a different time. What blows my mind is the people that I um, basically were my heroes. They were all getting up in age when I was going to see them. They were veterans, and what's cool is that Charlie Watts and those guys, they hung out with these guys and they were all pretty much in the same age group. So that in itself is just amazing because I don't. There's not a lot there today. Like the blues scene is changed quite dramatically. In fact, stuff that I'm doing right now professionally is to get younger people more interested in blues the way I got interested in blues. However, the hip hop is to me the blues of the millennium, and because everything that's happening in that is just oh, sorry, I'm not paying attention to this stuff. Anyways, Charlie Watts was, I think, the perfect choice to play with the Rolling Stones, and they waited for him to become available. So once the Rolling Stones had Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts, off they went, and they just kept going. Um, so this guy says, "I love the blues." I'm taking this is someone in Holland who's a male, a dude, loves the blues. I'm practicing guitar 6 months a day. That's awesome. Every day. He's been playing guitar every day for 6 months. I hear you. Um, his favorite guitarist is Jerry Garcia. That's funny. I just did a show on Sunday, and this girl was telling me that I reminded her of Jerry Garcia. That's so funny. I used to be compared to Elvis when I was younger, but whatever. It's good. He wants to play like Jerry. That's cool. He inspired Jerry. That's really cool. Inspired by Jerry Garcia. The Grateful Dead and the Stones didn't really like each other, I think, or Jerry didn't really like the Stones or something. Um, I'm in Canada, if you're wondering, Western Canada. Um, I don't know. The Rolling Stones, they did do to get a little more less information, I guess, about Charlie, or what we know more about the Rolling Stones and the relationship with the Grateful Dead, is that the Grateful Dead were on the Altamont gig, and like in the Life book by Keith Richards, that how that occurred is all in there. But if you don't want to read it, I'll just quickly review it. Basically, the band said, "Well, let's do this Altamont gig as a tag to the end of one of their tours," and they weren't sure how to do it. So they said, "Well, why don't we just get the Grateful Dead involved, get them on the bill, because they've been through it and they kind of know what they're doing." And so that's how that all came about. Um, whether or not they were friends, it's bands. For my friend from Holland, when you do get into a band, I imagine you're working your way into a band eventually. Um, the There's kind of a camaraderie that exists, especially in blues, um, that is undeniable. It's not a very large community, so people think it's really strange that I have so many friends in Chicago and Texas and California and all over the states, and I don't, go for beer with them after work. I just know them when either they're on tour or I'm on tour. Wherever we usually hook up, one of us is not at home. So, and even in the town where I play, there's a camaraderie of blues musicians that um, the Rolling Stones also experienced in the 60s. Because, like I said, when they were playing, they were. Um, the blues community, it's called. Um, there's not really there's just it's a really good support thing. Some bands don't get along uh, great with each other for one reason or another. Just some people, it's hard to get along with. You know, they're just different people, and they might not be the type of person you hang around with. That's just something natural in life. But generally speaking, when you have a music type of music all in common, or everyone has in common, it gives you a foundation to have conversations because you can be talking to a blues person from California or from your backyard. And if you're talking about a certain musician, more than likely you're both going to know the musician based on the success of that musician, whether they're celebrity status or what it is. They're well known or not, or barely, or well known in the blues community. So, and it's usually a conversation of, I really like how this guy plays this, or the way he sings this. It's a it's a commonality that uh, exists that I've never seen in rock and roll. Probably because rock and roll is a lot even bigger. It's not as a small community as blues has gotten to be, and blues is getting smaller, it seems, as each day goes by. So that's kind of why I'm doing this, to let you know on how big Charlie Watts was on affecting. He was a huge effect on the blues community too, because the Rolling Stones played blues music, and they're still playing blues music. They blues music has been around a very long time before the Rolling Stones even existed. It it goes back to the slave days in the United States, is where it pretty much started there. And so it was used as communication between groups of people, groups of slaves, so that their owners didn't know what they were really talking about. Almost like code. So the Rolling Stones playing the blues music, and it just, I can't remember exactly what my point was, but it kind of brought the blues to the public even greater than it would have been if it was done by another group that wasn't really as focused on blues. Like Charlie was a jazz background. He wasn't a rock and roll background because there was rock and roll was starting to happen, and I'm sure a lot of younger drummers were all trying to play the beats of the rock and roll records. But those rock and roll records are quite a bit different than blues. Um, so the effect that Charlie Watts had on the blues, on music genre, had a lot to do with me not accepting, but understanding the blues a little bit more. Um, I think it was Rolling Stones recorded the Little Red Rooster in the '60s before I was born, and they recorded a song that was a blues from a guy named Chester Burnett. I believe it might have been written by Willie Dixon. But Chester, um, also known as Howling Wolf, did this song, The Little Red Rooster, and then the Rolling Stones recorded it, and it went to #1 in England or something. And straight out of the blues book, like a standard. It's a blues standard. So his drumming on that was different than any other drumming I've heard for that song. I've heard versions by other musicians in Chicago, and it's just Rolling Stones just had a different feel to it. So that I'm getting a lot of text. I don't know why. Holy cow! what's going on there, but I'm turning off my phone because it's interrupting my thing. Okay, that's enough. So Charlie's playing the blues beats, and when I heard the Rolling Stone records, because they're more not accepted, they're more popular than the blues out of Chicago at the time. Like it was, they just did. They had great marketing behind all their music. I learned to play a lot of the blues that I love by listening to Charlie Watts on the drums. And the neat thing about Charlie is he didn't. Charlie played the blues his own way, like I was explaining earlier with the way he played the hi hat, kind of pulling back on it to give more boom to the snare drum. And I think, like I said, that was because you couldn't hear the snare drum over the girls screaming. So pull off on the hi hat and bang, hit it so everybody can sort of hear it over the screaming in the band. So learning those Chicago drum beats close, but not exactly the way they were played, was basically what I got from Charlie Watts as a drummer and as a musician and as a band as a whole. So I wouldn't say that's a really funny story, but it is a story because you gotta face it. Without Charlie Watts, I probably wouldn't even be playing drums. And the Rolling Stones are like a gateway band to the blues for a lot of people. So, and there was a lot of bands from England that had that ability. Some from North America as well, but more the bands from Britain had a big impact. So, Rolling Stones kind of led the way, and then other bands started copying the Rolling Stones later and becoming even not copying, but kind of following the same road that they were on, that they kind of broke the ground to pave or whatever. So yeah, Buddy Guy is definitely, we're talking blues in the chat for a story, and Buddy Guy is definitely a great influence. I met Buddy a few times passing through town because a friend of mine's band were opening up for him, so I got to sit down and chat with him. And Buddy Guy, of course, was part of the Rolling Stones pretty much ever since day one. I think he went to England in the 60s and met with them and played with them. And then he did as this person's mentioning, played with them in the Shine a Light concert thing that Martin Scorsese, I believe, put together. And that was an amazing show because that also shined a light a little bit more on what the Rolling Stones were like playing live on stage. And for a musician, thank you, Martin Scorsese, for that, because that's what really counts when you're a musician and you're playing on stage and you can relate to somebody as popular as the Rolling Stones in a similar environment. It's really cool. Why is that environment there? Maybe it's because everybody's playing blues. So haven't jammed with Buddy Guy, but I've jammed with a lot of his friends from Chicago, and it's a very similar thing. In fact, that is a big part of another reason why I like the Rolling Stones so much, is they carried on that tradition that I believe started in Chicago. I could be wrong. It's called sitting in. It's where a musician who may be a beginner, but usually generally somebody knows, or somebody who knows somebody in the band, will go to see a band play, and the leader of the band will ask that musician if he wants to sit in. And whether you want to sit in or not you better be sitting in, because there was a few times where I was asked and I just wasn't up to it for whatever reason, and I kind of regretted it later on. My friends and stuff, but apparently it's kind of if you get asked to sit in, you better sit in or go home. It's not a bad thing. It's just one of those quirky little rules about being asked to sit in. So the Rolling Stones, when they'd asked somebody to sit in. I don't know if anybody turned down sitting in with the Rolling Stones, because playing to like 50,000 people or whatever, that's got to be kind of a little bit cooler than playing to like 80 people or 100 people. It'd be kind of a buzz. So when the Rolling Stones would have somebody sit in on, they would have them sit in on their own tunes, not blues standards or anything. It's like, we're going to play a Stone song. Oh, okay. And I know Chuck Berry kind of did the same thing to, I think, in the Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, the Keith Richards show that was put together. I think Charlie Watts was also supposed to be on that production. I think Keith Richards mentioned something about that, but Charlie wasn't able to do it for some reason, and so Steve Jordan played the drums. And apparently, since Charlie passed away, he was sick, and I didn't know how sick he was. That's why it probably really hasn't sunk in. But Steve Jordan said, agreed to go out on the road while Charlie stayed at home to recover, and we all know he didn't recover. And so, but Steve ended up doing that gig with Charlie or Keith Richards and Chuck Berry, and that movie in itself, Hail Hail Rock and Roll, I think that's the title of it. Really helped people understand how Chuck Berry's rock and roll is some people call it that's real rock and roll. That's the real start of it was Chuck Berry. A lot of people will argue that point for lots of different reasons. However, and rightly so. Like there's lots of different types of rock and roll, even so. But there was something about Chuck Berry's music that the drums are super important. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there because of what I said about Charlie Watts drumming before. I don't know if there would have been that camaraderie or common ground between Chuck Berry and Charlie Watts. Or maybe there was some kind of thing about them both being Charles, named Charles. But anyway, Steve Jordan actually did the gig. And Steve Jordan's drumming, if you compare it to Charlie Watts, they're two unique drummers. Steve Jordan, I've always loved Steve Jordan's playing. However, he's not Charlie Watts. Charlie Watts' drumming is very different. And to have to decide, and I think Keith Richards was responsible for that decision on who was going to play drums on that whole deal with Chuck Berry. I think something in the back of his mind was saying, I don't think I can use Charlie on that because Charlie's a personality, and not to take anything away from Steve. Steve's also a personality, but it's a kind of a weird thing to describe. It's anyways, I'll just leave that as it is. So if Charlie had done that job, that whole show would have been different because there's something about the Chuck Berry beat, which is that what I was saying, it's like a little bit behind. It's like Um, I used to play boom, 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 do do, do do, do do on the bass drum. So it's a shuffle. I'm not playing drums, but I hope you get the gist. It's a shuffle on the top, but the bass drum is actually playing a boom boom. And I always think of the song by Jimmy Vaughn, "Boom Boppa Boom," is a really good way to explain that type of beat. So um, I just find it all just mind-boggling on how Charlie Watts fits into all these different situations, playing the blues, uh, and Charlie Watts could probably sit in with any blues band or jazz band on the planet and just do fine. He could have done that. He had that much talent, and he was that unique. But so many people, I guess, don't look at the subtleties of what that really is. So you can have an incredible amount of talent, like just an amazing, overwhelming presence, and have this one big trick. Or you can be like Charlie Watts, who just had like a library of tricks, and it was huge. And that I don't know. It's six of one, half dozen of the other kind of situations. But I think having that huge arsenal of different tricks, but all subtle, is very powerful, and it hooks musicians. A lot of musicians I know, because of the Rolling Stones, started playing music. So they started learning to play drums. They learned to play guitar. A lot of guitar players learned to play guitar because of the Rolling Stones. Singers, Mick Jagger, you know, like, come on. So, and for myself, drumming was, Charlie Watts was huge. Charlie Watts and my friends from Chicago. A lot of the people I played with, Willie Big Eye Smith, I played with him from Chicago, and he was Muddy Waters' drummer for a long time. Learned so much from that dude, and I probably wouldn't have done very well playing with him if I hadn't learned the basics from Charlie Watts. It's like I was saying, that Charlie kind of had this really cool way of translating beats for me and probably a lot of other drummers, because I think it was because they were more in the public eye than a lot of the Chicago blues drummers. But the beats that Charlie played, yeah, he played all these Chicago drum beats, but when you listen to them on records, they were easily understood and could be just because of his style too. A very unique, like his drum kit, super basic. And when you're learning to play drums, yeah, you want it pretty basic, because if it's all fills and fluff, you're not gonna really get the gist of the beat. It's like this little part of a song. But if the whole song has got that simple beat, it's easier to play along with. It's easier to absorb, and because it's more not monotonous, but it's more prominent or prevalent. So um, yeah, the it's still kind of a sad day knowing that Charlie's not going to be coming out anymore with really cool beats and stuff. I still learn from Charlie Watts. So he's an innovator, and those are hard to find, and he's going to be missed by a lot of people. So other funny stories. of Charlie Watts. I'm waiting. I've got one from Holland, and it was that a very funny story involving Mick Jagger and Charlie Watts and the scuffle they had. And I'm sure it wasn't the only one. Um, Something I always noticed about Charlie Watts in interviews, how is like I said, how um, maybe the word is deadpan, but he didn't take them seriously unless the questions were relevant. Like a lot of people ask celebrities the same. A lot of interviewers will ask the same questions over and over and over, and they don't try to dig deep to get some more information. So that's something that I really didn't get from Charlie Watts in interviews, is that he really didn't go into great depth in his interviews about his personal life. Um, a lot of the stuff he did that was kind of funny, as I remember, I think I think it was Eric Clapton getting a Grammy award, and the guys presented him. The Rolling Stones presented Eric with the award. A lot of people don't realize that Eric Clapton. Oh, I can't remember all the names. In the early '60s, Eric Clapton and a lot of up and coming blues fanatics, the younger guys in that age group, because those Stones and Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, they're all kind of in the same age. They would hang out at this club. Eagle Club, was it? With Alex Cornier? Anyways, it was this old '60s club, and Eric knew Charlie because Charlie was always on drums at this club. And when the Rolling Stones presented Eric Clapton with this award for whatever show business thing, they probably don't see each other a heck of a lot. And so I remember Eric taking the award and shaking Mick's hand. I think Ron Wood was there, shook his hand, Keith Richards, and then Bill. I don't think Bill Wyman was there. I can't remember, but I remember Eric going to shake Charlie's hand, and Charlie just pulled his arm and gave him a big hug, and I just felt so good to see that because these guys are all responsible for bringing us the music that they brought us, and they have that blues community exists at their level as well as my level, the level that I'm at as a performer and a blues freak. Um, is they all have there's this commonality or common thread. It's not a big community. I just thought that was really cool that they're tight, although their careers are so different. One like they're huge players, but they're also very different. And I think with Charlie Watts, he's a behind the scenes sort of musician. Like I said, he's a musician's musician, and was able to be in the back, just kind of observing a lot of stuff, but at the same time on stage with great performers. And who's supplying the most important part of the music, the beat? Charlie Watts. So I think that's about it. I think that would wrap up this experiment that I tried. So I hope everyone liked the story from Holland. That's the only one we got, which was pretty hilarious. I can't right now think of any other ones that are coming to mind. Is there Well, they're, they're more of moments in studios that I thought were funny on how so many of the songs that would evolve in the recording studio always had the drums as being a major focal point. So a songwriter can write a song, and I don't think even Keith Richards knows how to play the drums. I think Mick Jagger has some skill on the skins, but uh, none even close to Charlie Watts. So when you think of all these hit songs that were written by that songwriting team, it's a really good chance that they probably wouldn't have had the same impact on music if it wasn't for Charlie Watts. Sorry, that was my phone ringing again. Another phone. Anyways, I think that wraps it up for this. Um, yeah, feel free to add more stories later. Oops, I have to learn to spell. I'm not really good at typing. So I'm probably going to be, as a side note, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to probably be doing this a little bit more about some of about music and the stories that I've got to share about certain situations in music that I think are um, more personal about people I actually know and have played with, which is kind of a lot of people don't know these stories. So thank you for watching this, and have a great day and rest in peace, Charlie. Love you.